then we have to ask a completely different question. It's not whether the dollar is going up or down versus silver, but is the dollar going up or down against the Japanese yen? And that's what we talked about earlier. And unfortunately, we're in a position right now where the dollar is actually going up quite significantly.
Hello. Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad TV, radio show, whatever you call these things now. But anyway, we have a special guest. He used to be my roommate at Rich Dad in Scottsdale. And that balloon hanging in the background is courtesy of George Gammon. And I'll let George explain the concept of the balloon. The other is game board for Rich Dad, for the cash flow board game. But I'm going to have George talk about what he's going on with the dollar. He's my macro guy. I'm going to explain one more thing. When people, some people know my friend John McGregor, and John McGregor is from Hawaii. He was Obama's classmate, which he denies vehemently. But anyway, John McGregor's father wants to know how I got to school in New York and all that, given I'm so stupid. How do you know so much graduating from Hilo High School? Hilo High School is not known for its academic prowess. And I said, though, the secret to my success is the way I got through school is I always sat next to smart people, especially at test time. And that way I didn't have to study as hard. And so that holds true for me today. When I want to know something, I call. We just did a podcast with Andy Scheckman. I want to know taxes. It's Tom Wheelwright. It's debt. It's Kenny McElroy. You don't have to know that much as long as you carry your own, contribute, but hang out with people smarter than you. And the trouble with professors, as we all know, is they have to be the smartest. That's why they know so little.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just ironic how little professors know, but they have this PhD. And the biggest problem of all is our central banks, the Fed, is run primarily by a bunch of professors. This time it's an attorney, which is even worse, a guy named Powell. But our economy is in a frickin' mess. And I'm not blaming this Fed because we've been cruising for a bruising for years. I mean, ever since they took the silver out of silver coins in 1964, and Nixon took the gold out of the dollar in 71. Ever since then, we've been running, we'll buy you one of these. 20 years from now, be about 500 of these to buy one of these here.
Right.
They can't do the math, George. They can't get the transfer. So, well, I'll wait till it's 500. I'm going, okay, wait. So anyway, the way you get through school and you get through life is you always have people who are just natively smarter than you. So I'm very honored to have George, my friend here. He used to be my roommate in Scottsdale, Arizona. And he's my macro go-to guy. And he's going to talk about what's happening to this piece of toilet paper. It's still important, but it's still toilet paper. So before we go on, George, what does the balloon represent to you?
Well, the balloon represents the financialization of the economy. And so back in the good old days, the Wall Street, the stock market, would be a representation of the overall economy because you have the businesses in the economy. And if they do better and better and better, then of course the economy is doing well, and you would assume that their share price would increase. Unfortunately, that's not the way it works anymore. And that's why I use the example of the balloon. The way a healthy economy should work is the economy should be the balloon and the stock market should be the basket. So wherever the economy goes, so goes the balloon, so goes the basket. But now we have the inverse relationship. So the balloon is actually the stock market and the basket is actually the economy. So wherever the stock market goes, so goes the economy. And it's a perverse setup. And unfortunately, it's one of the many reasons why the Fed has to make a lot of decisions to prop up the stock market that might create economic distortions in the real economy. And at some point, you're going to have to pay the price for that. And I think we may be getting to a point now in the United States or within the next couple of years where we're going to have to pay the price for our economy being so financialized and dependent upon asset prices instead of being dependent on good old-fashioned hard work and productivity.
So what George is saying here, I covered here, Rich Dad's prophecy. What happened in 2008, the banks, the debt market collapsed. And so this came out in 2013. It says why the biggest stock market crash in history is coming. Because exactly as George is saying, is in 2008, instead of fixing the problem, they printed more money just to keep the stock market up. And what George has said before in other programs, we're in an everything bubble now. We're in a bubble in the bond market, stock market, real estate market, and it's hanging by this balloon right now. And then I wrote this book here, Who Stole My Pension. Now it's near and dear to my heart, not George's. But us old guys, we're the baby boom generation, is the first generation with a 401k.
Hmm.
Well, prior to that, like the generation just before me, we had what's called defined benefit pension plan. So if they worked for Ford Motor Company guaranteed their pension. But what happened in 1974, my generation, Trump's generation, Biden is gone. But anyway, we were the first people with a defined contribution pension plan called the 401k or IRA. And then Wall Street went to town looting our pensions. So when they today the stock market's down, what a surprise. And when they asked, I think 10,000 boomers are retiring every single day here. That balloon's coming down.
Yeah.
So that's why I want to talk to George and all that. And I highly want to recommend you guys listen to George's Rebel Capitalist show and all this, because the balloon is coming down. So George, I'll let you take over for there because you know a lot more about it. And what should people be concerned about? Remember, please keep it super simple. And my
Sure.
job is to keep it super simple.
Well, what's interesting about where we are right now with the global economy, which is definitely going to impact the United States because everything is so interconnected, is actually the value of that piece of toilet paper that you just had. Not necessarily relative to silver, but relative to other pieces of toilet paper. So every country has their own piece of toilet paper. We call ours the dollar. If you're in Germany, you call it the euro. If you're in Japan, you call it the yen. So what's important is not just to look at what the dollar is doing relative to goods and services or silver in the United States, but it's also very important that we look at what the dollar is doing relative to other fiat currencies.
Right.
So
There's
why?
one more thing. We just had Andy Scheckman on. It's interesting that this ounce of gold has a different price in the U.S. than in China. And it just depends upon, again, what George was talking about, the fiat currency. I think the panic is on right now because of China and all this. And so the value of gold in China is more than America.
Mm.
So it takes more yuan than dollars to buy the same thing in Japan. So that's why it's real interconnected, but we're all hanging by one big balloon.
Yeah, yeah. And so the next step here is we have to think about someone's debt, right? So if you have a mortgage on your house, I think everyone can relate to that. Your mortgage, you have to pay that back in dollars for Americans. That's the deal. You borrowed, let's say, $500,000. So every single month when you make your mortgage payment, let's just say it's $2,500 or something, you have to pay that back in dollars. You can't call up Wells Fargo and say, "Hey, this month I'm going to pay you in Japanese yen." That's not going to fly. They want dollars, and usually this isn't a problem because most people's income who have a dollar-denominated mortgage, let's say, their income is in dollars. So the value of the dollar, it's not really relevant to them. But unfortunately, outside of the United States, because the dollar is the global reserve currency and it's used for, let's say, 60 or 70% of global settlement, even between countries that don't involve the United States. So what you have is a lot of countries, a lot of entities within countries, such as Japan, let's say, that have to borrow dollars, but yet their income, their cash flow, is in Japanese yen. So what happens is when the dollar, that piece of toilet paper, goes up in value against the yen, their piece of toilet paper, all of a sudden the burden of their overall debt increases significantly. And then
because their yen went down.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
but let's just assume for a moment that you have a mortgage in Japan, but your mortgage is in dollars. So every single month you owe the bank $2,500. But what happens is your income is in yen. So if the value of the dollar increases relative to the yen, you need more yen every single month to pay your mortgage. See, you need more income. And if you don't have the income, then you can't make your mortgage payment. See, that's why the dollar going up against that other currency is so important. Now, you combine that, Robert, with the fact that Japan has to import the majority of its oil. And what do they need to buy the oil?
Dollars.
They need dollars. So you get this double whammy where if the price of oil is going up on the global market from, let's say, $65 to where it is today, call it 87 or so, especially with the invasion or the terrorist attacks in Israel, if that turns out to be, heaven forbid, if that turns out to be another war, then that's most likely going to put more pressure on the price of oil, increase it, and that makes it very difficult for someone like Japan because they need more and more yen to buy that barrel of oil because the dollar price is going up. But on top of that, to add insult to injury, the value of their yen is going down against the dollar. So they need twice as much yen in order to buy that one barrel of oil, which is absolutely crucial to their
Can I add one more wild card to the whole thing?
Sure.
So back in 1990, the Japanese stock market crashed. So that was 1990. So that's what, 10, 20, almost 25 years ago. The crash has not recovered yet.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And we're heading for a crash now. So the possibility of a word called depression looms all over the world. I mean, is that possible from a macro side, George?
Absolutely. Yeah. And people, let's talk about oil for a minute because everyone knows that that's makes the gas prices go up most of the time. And we see that as inflationary, meaning all prices will go up. But at a certain point, Robert, it's actually deflationary because if incomes aren't going up at the same pace as the gas prices, now all of a sudden you got to rob Peter to pay Paul. And if you don't, so you're going to have to not spend money on something else. Okay, we got it. So you're going to have to not spend money on something else in order to put gas in your car because we can't go without that. We have to get to work. We have to go get groceries. We have to pick our kids up from school and whatnot.
So I'll tell you, well, we leave with that right now. We're going for a break, but when we come back, we want to talk about what can you do about it.
Sure.
I mean, the reason I added Japan to the mix in 1990, the U.S. stock market today is crashing, and I kind of wrote about it in this. I said, this book came out in 2013, and I said, the reason I could predict the crash is because they're not going to do anything different, George. They're just going to print money.
Yeah.
They're going to print more of this stuff here.
Yeah, maybe after the break we can talk about how the market can actually crash up. It doesn't have to crash down.
Yeah, so we don't know which way it's going to go here, but that's what happens when you print fake money. It also what happens when people think this and real gold are the same. Let me give it again today. George, I'm so old. At one time, I was paying $50 an ounce for this silver.
Yeah.
Today, it's $30. The bargain. And guess what? I just bought the other day an EV. I mean, I shifted, and I'm an oil guy. I shifted to an EV.
Yeah.
And so, what's that going to do to the demand of silver? Do you know what I mean?
And copper.
And people are still saving this here. So, my question to the fans before we take a break: if it takes 30 of these to buy one of these in 2023, how many of these will it take to buy one of these in 10 years?
Yeah.
That's the question. And that's the question George is going to talk about. Not that we have a direct answer, but the situation's fluid. Things are changing with war in Israel, war in the Russia and Ukraine. And we have China. China's licking its chops over Taiwan. The Rich Dad Radio show is on Rich Dad Radio archive there. So you can ask your friends, family, especially that stupid brother-in-law of yours about money. Because a lot of people think this is money here. This is called toilet paper. And our school system is still teaching people to save this, work hard for this, and all this. And like I said, today it's 2023. It takes 35 of these to buy one of these. The question is in 10 years, how many of these will it take to buy one of these? Which would you rather save, the silver or the dollar? And most people still choose toilet paper. It makes no sense to me. So George Gammon here, like let's introduce him. One of the lessons I learned from high school is you don't have to be smart as long as you sit next to the smartest people. Now in school, that's called cheating. Capitalists call it cooperation.
Yeah.
George and I are cooperating today. A professor would call it cheating, but George is going to explain from a macro point of view because he's my go-to guy when I want to know what's happening to that balloon up there. And today that balloon is one big global balloon. We're swinging right now. So what's happening, George?
Well, that balloon has a lot to do with the amount of debt that we have, not only in the United States, but in the global economy. And like we were saying earlier, a lot of that debt is denominated in dollars. So if the dollar goes up against other currencies, and the interesting thing here, Robert, is the dollar can go down in value against stuff that we buy. To your earlier point, it's toilet paper. You're much better off holding silver or gold as far as a store of value, because in 10 years, that piece of gold or piece of silver can most likely buy the same amount of stuff that it buys today. But when we look at currencies relative to one another, then we have to ask a completely different question. It's not whether the dollar is going up or down versus silver, but is the dollar going up or down against the Japanese yen? And that's what we talked about earlier. And unfortunately, we're in a position right now where the dollar is actually going up quite significantly against other currencies. And this becomes a big problem for the global economy because it makes it harder for them to pay off their dollar-denominated debt because their cash flow is in a currency that is losing value. So we're
in Japan's case, it's a yen losing value. So it's getting more expensive on the Japanese
China,
people.
it's the yuan, it's the euro, it's the pound sterling. I mean, Israel, as an example, due to their issues over the weekend, their currency dropped by like 2 or 3% just in one day, and their relative to the dollar, and their central bank had to come in and intervene by selling dollars to buy back their currencies to artificially prop it up, because that would be a huge problem for them. So we're seeing the dollar go up and up and up and up and up, not against goods and services in the US, it's going down, but against other currencies going up. And most of your viewers will probably remember the mid-1980s. We had something called the Plaza Accord. And the Plaza Accord in 1985 was a result of the dollar getting too expensive relative to other currencies. So the global superpowers had to come in and intervene to actually drop the value of the dollar down by 50%, or else the global economy would have imploded. And right now, we're getting close to a point where the central planners could have to intervene. And I know it sounds extremely counterintuitive, but over the short term, they may have to intervene to bring the value of the dollar back down to a level that won't cause significant problems for the global economy.
Wow. And one more thing is, Andy Sheckman always talks about it. If we shift to another currency, whatever they talk about, is that there's hyperinflation because the dollars will come rushing back to America. And people think hyperinflation means prices go up. Hyperinflation means the value of the dollar goes down. And that's what sometimes is hard to comprehend. I say, well, this thing has gone up in value. No, the dollar has come down.
Yeah.
And that's why I turned to George, because a lot of things don't appear as they seem initially. You know what I mean? It's not going up. Something else is coming down relative to it.
And what's weird is the dollar can go down very quickly against stuff in the United States. I mean, a good example, Robert, would be just a year ago, we were at 9% inflation. And that's what the government admits to. Now it's down to 3.5, call it. But we were almost at double-digit levels of inflation in the United States. That means the value of the dollar is going down, and it's going down very, very quickly. But at the same time, what did the value of the dollar do relative to other currencies? Went up. It went up. So
that's why, if I could explain that to you, that's why I want you to listen to George Gammon, the Rebel Capitalist show, all the time, because I sit there listening to him and going, my brain twists into knots. but at least I can unravel it a couple of days later. It doesn't make sense. It's counterintuitive most of the time. Things are getting expensive, not because the property's getting expensive, the dollar's coming down, so you work harder for this.
Yeah.
This is going down in purchasing power, so you work harder for this and you save more of this. That's why the poor are getting poorer.
Well, yeah, that's one main reason, because they save that, and if your expenses are denominated in dollars, which most people are that are listening to this show, that's where the value of that dollar is really going down, and it's gone down very quickly. And to your point, it'll most likely continue to go down into the future. Uh, I think that this decade, the 2020s, is going to be an inflationary decade overall. So the other inflationary decades that most of us are familiar with are the 1940s and the 1970s. But the inflation in those decades didn't go up in a straight line. It never does. It never goes from 2% to 10% to 20% to 30%. That doesn't happen. What happens is it goes from 2% to 9% to 3%, back up to 12%, down to 7%, back up to 15%. You just look at the 1940s as an example. 1947, Robert, the inflation rate in the United States was 19%, 19%. And 2 years later, it was negative 2% deflation. So and even in the 1970s, you see the inflation go up, it comes down. It's basically this roller coaster ride constantly. So I think that right now, obviously, we're in a down cycle in the amount of inflation. We're at disinflation. And if we have a significant recession, which is what the yield curve is predicting, the bond market, going into 2024, you could even see deflation. But then what happens next? That's the question. Well, then the central planners come in and they have to keep that balloon elevated.
Would you explain
the inverse relationship between the interest rates and bond prices? Mean? Yeah, so with with bond prices like treasuries, when we see the yield going up, the price is going down. There's an inverse relationship between the two. So with the CPI, that's
Consumer Price Index.
Yeah, that's right. It's going up and down. It's kind of like a roller coaster ride. But I think the 2020s overall, when we look back, when we're at 2030s, we look back on the 2020s, we'll say, okay, yes, that was overall an inflationary decade. But my point is, in the short term, you can have this disinflation. You can have maybe even deflation like we saw in 2009 when you have a big financial bust. But then the question becomes, well, what do the central planners do to prop up that balloon, that hot air balloon? Because the U.S. economy is built on asset prices. Unfortunately, that's where we are because of that financialization. So they have to keep that balloon elevated. So in order to do that, to your point, they're going to deficit spend a lot. It's going to be a repeat, likely, of what we saw in 2020. When M2 money supply goes up by 25%, they take money from savings, they sell treasuries, and then they send that money out in stimulus or universal basic income. They basically take money from savings and turn it into checking. So the velocity of money goes higher. So my point is, even if in the next 6 months we have more disinflation or even deflation, after that, the response to that crisis will likely take us to that next wave of consumer price inflation, just like we saw in the 1970s, just like we saw in the 1940s.
So do you expect global inflation or just U.S. inflation?
Yes. I would say that the 2020s will be an inflationary decade for the entire global economy, similar to what we saw in the 1970s.
What really disturbs me is when Biden got elected in 2020, his first act was to cut off the Keystone XL pipeline. So that's a pipeline that ran from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico.
Right.
The moment he cut it, and I'm an oil guy, I went to school for oil. I worked for Standard Oil. So when he cut that pipeline, I knew exactly what he was doing at that moment. I have oil wells in North Dakota and Texas. And the moment he cut that pipeline, my oil prices went from $30 a barrel to $130. And what does oil? Civilization runs on oil. Yeah. So I knew immediately what Biden was doing for ESG, for the greenies, environmental social governance. He was cutting off oil, but he was driving inflation higher. When he drove inflation higher, the banks went, "Oh my God!" And their bonds. So Powell, the Fed, started raising interest rates. When they raised interest rates, it damaged the bonds inside the banks. Am I correct with that?
Yeah, because the interest rates, to your point, went up, and therefore
Yeah.
the prices of those bonds went down. So if the
Yes.
banks were forced to sell the bonds, which they
Yeah.
were because they had deposit flight, then all of a
Right.
sudden they take a haircut on that, and their
Right.
equity goes down to zero. They go bust.
So Biden directly has set up a banking failure. And I don't think it's a mistake. You know what I mean? I mean, you cut the pipeline off, oil goes from 30 to 130. Guys like me get richer. So Powell raises interest rates, the Fed raises interest rates. It destroys the banks because their treasuries go down in value. And we're in serious trouble right now. I think they knew what they were doing. I mean, I hate to be tinfoil hat conspiracy guy, but you just watch, you cut the price of oil, what's going to happen? I mean, cut off the pipeline supply of oil. Now we have war all over the place for oil again. What's going to happen, George? And we're in that balloon swinging right now.
But also think about that in terms of the dollar, Robert. So you increase interest rates. So there are a lot of foreign countries that actually hold those treasuries, just like Silicon Valley Bank. So those foreign countries have to take a haircut on their bonds. Well, what happens if their currency goes down? They have to sell the bonds to get the dollars they need to buy the oil or to buy the commodities, but they're selling them at a massive haircut. So when you're sitting there talking about how maybe this was intentional to make the banks go bust, I think you could also think about how that may have been intentional to really stick it to our enemies, so to speak. You know, if you want to look at Russia or China or Saudi Arabia, if you really wanted to hurt their economy without going to, a hot war with them, you would raise interest rates to increase the value of the dollar to make them sell their treasuries at a big loss, and then continue to have to scramble around to try to find those dollars as it appreciates in value because the Fed is raising interest rates while other central banks are cutting interest rates. So I don't think that's tinfoil hattish. I mean, if you just, what would you do if you were in the administration?
If I can figure it out, George, if I can figure it out, they can figure it out. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So
or another way to look at it is, why would they not do that? Like if you're trying to keep China out of Taiwan, why would you not want to make it as difficult for them as possible financially? And the way that you do that is increase rates and increase the value of the dollar relative to their currency, not relative to goods and services in the United States.
Anyway, it's a black swan time, George.
Yeah.
So any words of wisdom for my listeners here?
Yeah, you just want to, in times of black swan, whether it's the dollar going up or crashing down, or time, who knows, World War III, we could be on the brink of that. What you want to own is you want to own an asset that has no counterparty risk, right, Robert? And we talked about those green, and not only that, but let's think about it. Most people that own toilet paper, they don't even own the physical toilet paper. They own the electronic toilet paper that's a liability of their bank, which we know can go bust. It's even worse, right? So for heaven's sakes, if you don't own if you don't have a portion of your net worth that's in an asset that has no counterparty risk, and obviously what I'm talking about there is gold, Bitcoin, maybe silver, something like that.
And this kind of toilet paper, because I actually do own a lot of real toilet paper, George, because there's no counterparty risk to it. And I'm so full of shit, I'll probably use it.
That's good.
So the best investment.
Main takeaway for the audience.
They'll say from George Gammon.
Risk.
They'll say from George Gammon and Robert Kiyosaki, your best investment is get some Charmin toilet paper. No counterparty risk. Get it while you can. Hey, George, thanks for the years and years of friendship and wisdom. I appreciate it. And then for all you listening, we'll be right back with a final wrap-up on the Rich Dad Radio Show. So, George, thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.